Good morning, everybody. It's a Sunday morning here in Ellensburg, Washington, USA. It's a winter morning, pretty dark outside, starting to get light out, and I'm so glad that you're with us this morning. We were just together yesterday, and here we are again today. The local time is 8:49 in the morning, and we will begin our program on strike-slip basins at the top of the hour. I guess that's about 10 minutes from now, huh? About 10 minutes from now. So if you're watching this in replay, you know the drill. You can scrub ahead. You're in control. If you're watching this in replay, you can move ahead, fast forward about 10 minutes, and that will be the beginning of the lecture, quote unquote. But I'm live here with, 200 plus people, and we're going to say hi to each other as we normally do and just visit for a few minutes. So, thanks for joining us. Let me do something right away before I forget. Yes. Who can we say hi to this morning? And let me scroll back right off the bat because there's lots going on here. I'm glad to see 5x5, so I'm getting some confidence now with this technology. Now, of course, I have a new wrinkle already this morning, which I can share with you in a bit. But Jay is in London, or maybe he's saying hello to London. Alberta Gary's with us. East Tennessee Greg is with us. Garrett, the Dutch Night Owl from the Netherlands. Come on now, what's going on? Lakeville, Minnesota, that's Craig. Good morning, everybody seems rather perky. Adele in Disco Park in Seattle. Good morning, Adele. Snarky User, Rochester, New York. Milwaukee, Oregon. Yakult, snowy Yakult, Washington. Chris, I don't know where that is. Yakult. Interesting, I'll have to Google that. Or you can tell us maybe. Finland, good morning. Downtown Harlan, Iowa. Hi, Patty. Thunder Bay, Ontario. San Diego. Kent, Washington. Redmond, Washington. Dorset, UK. Bremerton, Washington. I guess I skipped down to live for some reason. Gatineau, Quebec. Hello, Michael or Michelle. Too fast. Slow it down, boy. Slow it down. Mill Creek, Washington. Sharon's at the Malaga Slide in the Wenatchee area. Washington. Philomath, that's Kirk. Harold is from Illinois. Hello, Harold. Something about England, what was that? Somerset, England. Hi, Tim. Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Chehalis, Washington. Hey, man, I know it's a busy time of the year, so it's especially, I'm especially thrilled that we have so many here, more than 300 now showing up. Nick is in Nyon, Switzerland. What up, homie? A couple more hellos, and then I'll send my email to Erin. We already know who the guest is today, so we're not going to be guessing today. Tolga Tuna from Istanbul, Turkey. Hello, Tolga. Thanks for joining us today. Sipe in the Netherlands. Sunnyvale, California. Göteborg, Sweden. I think that's right, Kirk. My one and only time visiting Alvesta, Sweden, some family friends. Sankalp's in Rishikesh, India. I'm glad to have you back. Thank you. Kamloops, BC. I'm skipping all over the place. Gordon's in Glasgow, Scotland. Joan is in Kamloops, British Columbia. Regine in France. Andre in Bonaire, Dutch Antilles. Hello. I can't stop. A few more. Ricky's from Michigan. Mac is from Newport, Oregon. I'm live now. Reading the live comments, in other words. Woodinville, Washington. Billings, that's Charles. Tillamook, Oregon. Richard. Waiakile, it's raining in Hawaii this morning. It's a little earlier there, right? Maybe 7 a.m. Federal Way, Washington. Rachel wants to know if Patrick's here. Others are saying hello to Patrick. I guess you must be here. Good morning, Patrick, age 8. LaConnor, Washington. Minna's in Finland. Cleveland, Ohio. Alfredo, Washington. All right. Red Lester says, is anyone watching from the International Space Station? And if not, why not? If not, why not? Yeah, it's a little bit ambitious. I mean, I never dreamt we'd have people from Melbourne, Australia watching live like Ian is right now. And Michael is in Rüsselsheim, Germany. Hello. Olaf's in Bern, Switzerland. What up, homie? Vienna, Austria. That's Crown House. Ah, lots of distant lands this morning, which is especially fun. Okay, let me send my email to Erin, and then I'll tell you my little twist this morning with the technology. And I'm actually kind of confident, dangerous, but I'm confident about using the iPad this morning. I'll tell you why in a sec. All right. The older gentleman starts mumbling to himself. I am going to Mellon. I am copying the invite link. I am going to email on my other monitor. I have Erin's email all set to go. I am copying and pasting, and I'm sending the link. Now, I'm sure there's an easier way to do this. I don't know if I'm interested in learning it right now. You know, I'm kind of a one-trick pony in many ways. And that's fine. Things have been functional for the most part. And of course, I'm jinxing it by saying it this way. So, what's the new trick today, and why am I? Okay, so let's put my money where my mouth is. Am I really confident in going back and forth between the iPad and back to the webcam, which is otherwise known as phony the iPhone, without it freezing? I think so. Here we go. Spladam. Yeah. Is that live? Yes, it is. Spladam back. Didn't freeze. Okay, so that is Nat, the Wonder Boy, that sweet, sweet, sweet son of a bitch, Nat. Merry Christmas, Nat. He texted me and said, how about, he saw that I was having trouble again yesterday with the frozen phone. He's like, how about you go without power on your laptop, because I only have 2 ports on this MacBook Pro. And how about you go use 1 port for the iPad and the other port for the dongle with everything else on it, including the camera. Because I was having more frozen phone problems half an hour ago as I was setting up, because I had them both going through the dongle. So anyway, and I don't know if this makes any sense to you or not anyway, but a few of you are technology savvy, way more than I am. I'm going to try it one more time. Yeah. And then yeah, and I didn't freeze again. So I'm going to be a little bit more confident in switching to the iPad, at least for the first half. Now, the trick is, I got to remember, maybe before we bring Erin in, maybe before, Erin's in the green room now, that's great. So maybe before I bring Erin in, and that, my plan is, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that, I got to make sure that I see my little battery icon on the laptop's already starting to get depleted. So I think my point is, I'm just saying this out loud so I can remember, I'm going to go to the iPad a bunch early on, and then I think if the battery continues to run down on my laptop, I'm going to disconnect with the iPad and get some power plugged into that other port. That's the plan for today. Anyway, a few more hellos, and we got 3 minutes, 2 minutes, I guess, so I'll have to start concentrating on what we're doing today. Who else can we say hi to here this morning? I'm just down in live. I'm not going to scroll back now. Duval, Washington. Andrew, good morning, Nick. Just wanted to say, really like using StraboSpot app for my master. Okay, all right, Andrew. So you picked up on that with what Erin was talking about yesterday. It's Greek to me, but I'm glad that works for you. Grandpa Carl in the Granger Clay Pits, to Lincoln City, Oregon. That's Doug. Jim's in Kelowna, BC. Sauber's in Lake City, Florida. You never know where Sauber is. Jennifer's in Boise. Jay says coffee morning. Dawn Zed in Madras, Oregon. Mark's in Puyallup. Trumpin 12 is from Port Townsend. In the barn working? Is that what I heard you say? You know, that's interesting to me. I'm hearing from a few, oh, hey, Bryce, you're from Tasmania again, man. You keep coming back. I love it. What time is it in Tasmania? Are you in the middle of the night, frickin' Monday or something? Tuesday? I don't know. I can't get that stuff straight. What was I saying? Yeah, some say I listen to your live streams. I'm like, what? So they either say I watch your podcast or I listen to your live streams, and I'm confused because the live streams, of course, are video and the podcasts are radio only. They're audio only. But I think some people may be like that gentleman. I forgot your name. It's on YouTube, but they're just listening. They're not really watching the picture, and they can still do other things, whether that's on their phone or on their laptop plugged in through speakers or something. I don't know. So, I mean, I'm not going to. It hadn't even really occurred to me, like, is there enough audio with what we're doing that it kind of makes sense even if you're not watching a screen? Kind of interesting to hear that. What do we got, 600 people still rolling in? Okay, I got to concentrate. It's already 9. Would you give me 1 minute, please, extra to concentrate? So glad you're with us this morning. This program will begin in 1 minute. Thanks. Hot mic. Hot mic. Okay, strike slip basins. Right, that's what you're talking about today, boy. And Erin is there, and she's ready to go. You don't have to worry about that technology. Go to the iPad early and often, before you run out of battery on your laptop. You can do that. That's not hard. Chalkboard. Yep. Offsets. Props. All right. Hey now, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is our last session before a holiday break. We're going to be away from each other for 2 weeks plus, and we're going to go to the iPad right now to let you know when we will be resuming this crazy Eocene A to Z series. But it's going to be a break, and so if you've missed a few shows to this point in the alphabet, here's a chance for you to get caught up. He goes to the iPad. He goes to Keynote with this within his iPad. Oh, slow down now. Slow down, boy. Don't get tongue-tied so early. So this is us. Where are you? You're here. This is us, of course. We're just starting Session L. And we started this series in mid-November, if you recall. I don't know if you've been with us every letter of the alphabet, but these are building on each other. I've said that a number of times. So this only works best. No, this works best if you see these in order. Or I guess if you've missed a few, you can go back and watch them. So these are all available, of course, in replay for you to watch. But when I'm done with you this morning, I'm going to unplug completely, I think, for at least a week and not really do any emailing or anything. I just try to be a good vacationer, which is not easy for me, but all of our family is home and we're heading up to Chelan for a few days to play in the snow and enjoy each other in the winter. So that's the plan. We'll see how much I can stay away from geology. But as we've discussed before, this geology stuff bleeds so much into my personal life anyway that I never really am away from this stuff. So when I see you next, we will resume this live stream series on Wednesday, January 5th of 2022. And we'll be back to our normal schedule because classes begin here at CWU the day before, on Tuesday, January 4th. And I'll have, be competing with other people for this classroom and that sort of thing and making arrangements. And I'll be teaching every morning anyway. So anyway, that's a look ahead to January. And then we are heading towards the end of the alphabet, and that will get us to mid to late February. So that is the plan there. I'm still on the iPad, damn it. And you know what? We're going to visit through Google. See how confident I am? we're gonna just go right to Google Earth and zoom in on this area that we were talking about yesterday with Matt McClincy and Erin Donaghy. And then we're back to the Chumstick Basin for the most part today, but we will start with the Chumstick and then kind of spread our wings a little bit and start going back out regionally. So let's just do this. I've noticed on the replays that if I do this too fast, it kind of pixelates or whatever. So I'm not going to zoom us right into the Discovery Hall necessarily, but if we start working our way north, and it's a snowy morning, up on Blewett Pass, there's all sorts of snow, and it's not easy traveling. This is the country we're talking about again today. Really the area between Wenatchee, Washington, that's the Columbia River coming south, and then up here in Leavenworth and even north of Leavenworth. So this area, can I enlarge a bit more for you? This area between Wenatchee and Leavenworth is our focal point again today. Now I'm just feeling like I want to mess around a little bit. I don't know why. So here's kind of a 360 view of the Chumstick Basin. I don't know if you're getting dizzy or not. Mission Peak will factor into this when we talk about the Leavenworth Fault. Again, you're looking south now. We're at the top of the screen, so that's my backyard up there in Ellensburg. So if I come in and live in a little bit more, yeah, Peshastin Pinnacles, I showed you. I didn't like that YouTube montage yesterday showing actual YouTube videos using the internet. I thought it was choppy, so I've got a different plan again today. God's World Exploration Station, good Lord. Okay, well, I'll have to stop there next time, make sure to take some notes. And also heading up to Leavenworth, and you might remember that there's a ski hill just outside of Leavenworth right here where there's good exposure. So anyway, I don't know how helpful that was, but that's kind of a look at, now you're looking south, and now if I come back around, oh shit, we're coming back home. Yeah, why not? We're dropping right into Discovery Hall, baby. Okay, good. Didn't freeze. Okay. Good. So that's not a great way to start. I feel like I usually want to kind of connect with you this way, and we do some stuff on the chalkboard, but again, you heard my plan of using the iPad sooner than later. Let's do a couple things. Have you even had a chance to look at this? I don't know if you have. I don't know if this looks very enticing to you, but if this is a titled program called Strike Slip Basins, we must be talking about strike slip faults, and we are. Clearly, in North America, the most famous strike slip fault is the San Andreas Fault down in California. We will talk about it in just a second. It started about 18 million years ago, and it is still active today, as we all know. The Straight Creek Fault up here in north central Washington will play a role today, not a pivotal role, but a role. 50 to 35 million years ago is the time window when the Straight Creek Fault was regularly producing earthquakes. In other words, when it was alive. But I'm starting to wonder if that number 50 is accurate. I'm starting to wonder if that 50 is an old date and needs to be updated based on the work of Erin and Mike, as we've been talking about the last few shows. And the number of offset here, the number of total offset, the number of kilometers of total offset, you're going to get different numbers depending on who you talk to or who you Google or who you read. But I just want to give you a general round number for some of these offset values. In other words, the total amount of land shifting along a strike slip fault. Somehow, before we go to Erin, I will also weave in another strike slip fault known as the Eddy Fault, which you don't know much about probably, but the Chumstick Basin lies between two strike slip faults, the Eddy Fault and the Leavenworth Fault. And these are the dates. Erin was probably going to correct me a little bit on this, but these are the general dates for the deposition of the Chumstick Basin itself. And I don't know how much total offset's on the Eddy, maybe nobody does, but there is 30 kilometers of offset back in this time window when the Leavenworth Fault was active. So that's my job, is to set the table for our visit with Erin and to somehow give us some, what I normally do here, which is a combination of old stuff that I've taught for a long time, which doesn't take much effort, but I also want to bring in some things that are brand new thoughts to me, and those new thoughts might launch us into a discussion with an expert, and Erin is the expert on the Chumstick, if you haven't figured that out yet. I don't care who we're talking about. Erin is the queen of the Chumstick Basin. Okay, good. Good. So, how can I make sure that we see that this Chumstick story fits into our series? Like we've done this before, and yes, it's the Chumstick, and yes, these are these dates, and yes, there's a rough agreement with the Blue Mountain unit on the Olympic Peninsula. And again, we visited with Erin a couple weeks ago with that. I'm reminding you that I want to get rid of the Cascade volcanoes, the Cascade volcanic arc, because these volcanoes and these magmas that continue to be active in the Cascade volcanoes, that story started 44 million years ago. This is a review from yesterday. The Cascade volcanic arc starts 44 and continues to present day. Well, let's get those out of there. We don't want those today. That's too young. That's a too young situation. So there's potential regional correlation between the Chumstick, the topic of today, and units to farther west. And we've dabbled with Erin about that, but we're going to do a little bit more with that today. I'm still just trying to set the hook for our session today. First major point of today that I think might be juicy. He pauses for dramatic effect. If the sand and other sediment in the Chumstick Basin was deposited between two active strike-slip faults, then why did that basin begin? And why did it end? And how can the Chumstick Basin and that structural hole where all that sand and other stuff is dropping into, how can that possibly be part of our story of the crazy Eocene? If it hasn't dawned on you yet, all of our crazy Eocene fireworks are related to the accretion, the slamming of Silesia. And that slamming is coming in roughly 50 million years ago, but we can't be rough anymore. We can't be rough with our dates. We can't be loose with our dates. If we got Mike Eddy and Erin Donaghy involved, and we do, we can't be sloppy now. You know the kind of precision that these guys have with these dates over the last couple of shows. So I'm talking to myself. I can't just say 50 anymore. I got to be a little bit more precise than that. And we want to think carefully today about the docking of this large igneous province known as Silesia and all the fireworks happening inland. So have I gotten to the first major point? No, here it is. There's a family of strike-slip faults. I'll go through some basics in just a second in case you're new to geology and not sure even what we're talking about. But these are faults, and when they were active, they were making earthquakes like the San Andreas Fault is today. And my point, I don't know if you can see this from where you're sitting or standing, these are little arrows. And each of those little strike-slip faults, viewed from space, is a right lateral strike-slip fault, meaning that when there's an earthquake on one of these faults, it's the block of crust on the southwest side of this fault that's going to shift northwest. That sounded confusing, but all I'm just trying to show you is that a bunch of these strike-slip faults oriented in this fashion, it's like a bunch of salmon swimming upstream. They're all parallel to each other. They're all northwest-southeast. They're all kind of showing up 50 million years ago as a direct result of the accretion of Silesia. Notice I'm bringing Silesia in from the southwest and I'm docking like this. I'm not bringing the large igneous province in straight east. I'm coming to the northeast. And that's important for us today because we're creating this strike-slip motion. Now, I did get a text from Jeff from Vinman's Bakery after the show yesterday, and he said, I'm glad this worked for you. Our large igneous province. It's easy to make these. We can make another one if you want to do something with Soletzia. In other words, you don't have to hold this gingerly for the next 2 months. So I'm not going to hold it gingerly. What should I do to this Soletzia after it docks and initiates these strike-slip faults starting about 49 million years ago? Is this the end of the story with Soletzia? Oh, I don't know if I can do it. I'm going to try. I'm going to... Oh, no. I got to do it this way. This isn't going to work. I think you know what I'm trying to say. Half of Soletzia is still with us. Half of it goes up to Alaska, and that's where Erin is heading next summer. Let's go quickly to some of these known strike-slip faults, do some basics, and then we go to Erin. Okay. To measure offset on a strike-slip fault, you need to find something that used to be together that has now been offset. So in a most pure strike-slip motion, here's the state of California. Here's a bunch of granite in the Sierra Nevadas. I'm going to do this quickly because I've done this a number of times with this in past series. So if we form the San Andreas Fault 18 million years ago, and we start doing earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault, and we move the crust 20 feet this way every time we have a big earthquake compared to the other side of the fault, if you do that thousands and thousands of times, you can take this Sierra Nevada granite and break it cleanly, and then you can measure between piercing points to get the total offset on the strike-slip fault. So you can take something that used to be together, I've done this before, and then you start motion on the San Andreas Fault, and then you suddenly have two eyeballs that used to be next to each other that no longer are. Okay, so this should work for everybody at Geology 101 level. So you lay down your ruler on the trend of the strike-slip fault, you try to figure out the total offset between the two eyeballs that used to be together. It didn't happen in one earthquake, of course, but the culminating effect over 18 million years gives us that situation. So what did we use to measure total offset on the San Andreas Fault? The answer is we take a point here, we take a point here where those things used to be together. Those two eyes used to be together, they no longer are. We measure the distance, whatever the distance was I wrote on the other chalkboard. Can't even find it. Straight Creek Fault in Washington. So this is from last fall when I was doing a whole exotic terrain series from the backyard when I had crappy wireless as opposed to this beautiful Ethernet connection. And I'll just hold this real steady for you for just a second, especially those that are new to it. But here's the US-Canada border. That your eye is drawn to this beautiful black line. That's the Straight Creek Fault. And this magenta here drawn in marker is the Mount Stewart Pluton, 93 million years old. But here's more of the Mount Stewart Pluton that's now up in British Columbia, 93 million years old. But 93 million years ago, that magenta and that magenta used to be together. So that's what I'm trying to draw for you here. Here's our 93 million year old Mount Stewart Pluton in central Washington. It's the Straight Creek Fault we're talking about. So again, the company line is 50 million years ago. the Straight Creek Fault gets established, and what used to be right next door starts to get shifted north. And with each earthquake on the Straight Creek Fault between 50 and 35 million years ago, you continue to offset that Mount Stewart granite. And not just the Mount Stewart granite, but the Chewacum schist, which is now known as the settler schist up in British Columbia. Same idea, though. Piercing points, and also using granites from the Cretaceous that we're using to reconstruct what the place looked like before. That was the Bob Miller show with Paul Umhofer long ago, 2 weeks ago now, or whatever it was. Okay? Now, how do we know the Straight Creek Fault is dead? Well, we can also use a pluton. Oscar, I'm using this chalk like crazy today. There is the Chilliwack pluton that's 35 million years old. That's right up at the international line between Washington and Canada. And that Chilliwack pluton, a granite, has not been broken at all by the Straight Creek Fault. So there's our data to help us see that there has not been an earthquake on the Straight Creek Fault in the last 35 million years. But before 35 million years ago, there had to have been some motion. Now, don't lose sight of the fact here. The Straight Creek and these other strike-slip faults in the North Cascades, none of them are here before the docking of Silesia, which is roughly 50 million years ago. And you know the theme of this series. The theme of this series is everything's happening at once. All the fireworks are filling the sky at once, and there's overlap between the fireworks. So we're no longer just talking about Matt McClincy and Erin Donaghy and studying the tuffs and the sand within the box. Now we're realizing that the reason that that basin is there is active strike-slip faulting, but the strike-slip faulting is initiating by the accretion of Silesia. Another big point. Doesn't feel like I'm ready to finish up and go to Erin. I'm sorry, I'm getting long-winded here, but there's kind of a lot to discuss, and I'm trying to find a narrative that's going to work so that when we visit with Erin, we're going to be able to just lock right in instead of trying to get our bearings. That's the hope, at least. What did I want to do? I want to do this. I want to draw this picture again. This is still the Straight Creek Fault. So this is the Straight Creek Fault. Major structure. Do you need it again? Also from last fall. Did this all sorts of times. Straight Creek Fault today in northern Washington and southern British Columbia. There's a lot of stuff that can be matched up if we get rid of that 160 kilometers of offset. Right there in the middle is the Stewart. The Stewart granite is that purple blob with the windy pass thrust and the Vetter thrust and all sorts of other things that are now offset 160 miles. My point is, this is the same Straight Creek Fault, but I'm minimizing this now. I'm cleaning it up for you. There are other strike-slip faults. This is also from the Bob Miller show a few weeks back. There are other strike-slip faults. So this is a strike-slip fault, the Straight Creek. This is a strike-slip fault. This is a strike-slip fault. I'm not even going to name them right now. That's too much for us, I think. But Geology 101 says if something cuts across something else, it's got to be younger. If something interrupts or cuts across other features, this thing's got to be younger. So if we can get very precise dates on the activity, in other words, when were these faults alive, including the Eniot fault, which is offset by the Straight Creek Fault, that's why I don't think the Straight Creek Fault started 50 million years ago. Now, I'll continue to think about it. But the beginning of the Chumstick Basin, which is forming in response to a strike-slip fault activity, started 49.22 million years ago, as I understand it. So you can't have the Straight Creek Fault starting before 50, the initiation of the either Leavenworth Fault or Antioch Fault, because these guys are offset by the Straight Creek. At least the Antioch is. So this is an active area for me to think about, but it's pretty significant for the next few summers with this research team that I'm involved with. So I need to make sure that I know as much as is known and go to that part at least. Okay. I feel like I'm running long on what I wanted to do, so I'm going to speed it up and I'm going to improv. Because to this point, all I'm talking about is pure strike-slip motion. Right? I'm doing this. I'm doing horizontal. Let's get rid of this. I'm just doing, oh, we have a strike-slip fault. Well, that means we're not going to make mountains. San Andreas Fault, there aren't huge mountains. Yeah, there's a little bit of hills and stuff, but there's not a huge mountain range on one side of the San Andreas Fault, the most well-studied strike-slip fault in the world, I think. Instead, it's this perfect, clear, pure, horizontal sense. And that's easiest for our brains, isn't it? Like to see offset of Straight Creek Fault, you need to get up in heaven and look down to see the motion. But if we're thinking about strike-slip faulting in cross-section, the pure strike-slip motion is this. So I got to do one more thing, don't I? What's the question? How many miles thick was the Chumstick sediment from yesterday? Like 5 miles thick or something between Matt McClincy and Erin Donaghy's work and others? You're not going to make a basin, are you, if you just do this? There's no basin here. Like we have to don't we have to pull the crust apart somehow? Like even with the San Andreas Fault in California, there's no big basin where a bunch of sand is falling into the ground. It's a clean lateral break. And I'm just realizing I forgot to bring in a prop I wanted to use. So I'm going to go to plan B. I don't know. Oh, I do know what gave me this idea. So I was on a field trip in southern Idaho in the mid-1980s, and Dave Rogers was an excellent teacher and still is, my thesis advisor. And it's funny what you remember, but he was trying to use words to describe basin and range extension and a half graben model to show this new way to view these normal faults in the basin and range, and he could tell everybody was tuning them out. So he said, "Hey Nick, where are your boots?" Because I think I was barefoot or something. I was like a hippie phase. "Where are your boots?" I'm like, "They're in the Suburban." "Go get them." "What?" "Go get them. Run." So I brought my boots back to Rogers. And it's funny what you remember, but I remember in the middle of this deserted highway, in the middle of, I guess it was northern Nevada now that I think about it, Rogers was taking my boots in 1987 and showing how the ground surface was horizontal originally. This is in the Miocene now, and that you take those boots and you rotate the boots. Come on now, baby. Come on now, baby. Listric normal faulting to create basins and ranges in Nevada. So, in honor of Dave Rogers, I want to use boots to at least get us started to think about why is there a basin when we do strike-slip faulting? Not normal faulting now, but strike-slip faulting. Why is there an actual basin for sand and cobbles and everything else to fall into? If we look from heaven looking down, remember that our faults are oriented northwest, southeast, and it's this side that's going to be broken cleanly. So here's the, what does that say? Columbia. So that this racing stripe on the bottom of my boot is together. But then every time we have an earthquake, when the Leavenworth or the Antioch fault were active, during Chumstick Basin time, we're doing this. We're moving one boot and shifting it sideways. But again, where's the basin? I don't get it. Here's the idea that Erin will help us see. It's a concept called transtension. Transform action, but also extension at the same time. And this is not going to be easy for my head and maybe yours as well. But we want to do two things simultaneously. We want to do our strike-slip fault, which is not creating a basin. But we're also going to pull these boots apart to create the hole or the gap for all of our sediment to dump into. And the sedimentation rates are crazy. That's coming from Erin. I promise, Erin, in 3 minutes, we're coming to you. This and opening, and I'll add one more wrinkle. Both sides of the Chumstick Basin have fruitcake. Both sides of the Chumstick Basin not only shifted, but also lifted. And that's the real reason I wanted to show you the boots. So on the Leavenworth Fault, there's strike-slip motion and uplift. On the Eniot Fault, on the other side of the basin, there's horizontal motion and uplift. So we're bleeding into the exhumation story and the geologic elevator coming up, which we're not ready for, but we're dabbling with that as well today. Okay, I don't think I want to go to the iPad right now. How's the battery? Still, battery's pretty good on the laptop. I think we need to bring Erin in right now, and we can improvise once we get her here. So, looks like we're still functional. You don't need any more from me. You need to hear from the expert. So, double checking that I have sound off of this window so I don't have that crazy echo. That's good. Plugging in here. Good morning, Erin.
Hi, good morning.
How are you today?
I'm good.
Good. You're sounding great, and thanks for your patience to sit through that. It was a little disjointed, but I feel like there's some concepts that don't work easily for me. This pull-apart basin thing. So I'm not really totally sure where to start. Let me try this way. Actually, you know what? Let's try this way. I was talking about you and Mike as this great team recently, and that's for sure. But you were working on the Chumstick long before you started working with Mike directly, right?
Yes, I did my master's thesis there, and I was working with Paul Umhofer at Northern Arizona University.
So I guess I've done this with other people. I'll do it with you as well. So you went to grad school at Northern Arizona, and did you have any indication you wanted to work with sedimentary units or strike-slip basins?
Yeah, so I did an undergraduate thesis at Bucknell University working with Jeff Trop, and I was looking at four-arc basin, Paleogene four-arc basin in southern Alaska. And so I was really intrigued already by how basins record these secondary tectonic processes, such as ridge subduction. And so when I had reached out to Paul about grad school, he had gotten this NSF grant approved to look at the Chumstick Basin as well as the North Cascades work, but trying to understand also ridge subduction in Washington. And so I was really, really, really intrigued, really wanted to go and work with Paul and start to really better understand how these basins record these tectonic events.
Well, that's kind of the secret so far with our series. We've avoided that ridge. You know, that's I think going to be most helpful when we get to the magmas, the chalice magmas. But I don't know. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit today if you choose. So can you help me and maybe the viewers at the same time? Why isn't the Chumstick Basin just a simple graben where you pull the crust apart and have the floor just drop vertically?
Yeah, so I think with basin and range and like thinking about listric normal faults and that type of extension is more along the lines of like pure extension. It's not necessarily invoking any strike slip motion in order to create that accommodation space and make that basin form. So with the Chumstick Basin, and you look at it in map view and you look at its shape, it kind of has this classic asymmetric basin shape. And it's then bounded by the Eniat, which we know is a strike slip fault, and then the Leavenworth, which is also a strike slip fault. And so in order to form that basin then to make that whole, you need the two strike slip basins on either side, and their offset and their motion allows, as they are both moving, you get this tearing of the crust, this extension between the two strike slip faults, which then forms this accommodation space in the hole that your sandbox that you're gonna dump all your sediments into.
So do we know if those two faults, the Eniat fault and the Leavenworth fault, are vertical, or they have some dips, so they're kind of like half normal faults and half strike slip faults? Do we know the geometry of those faults?
So we don't have any seismic or any subsurface imaging from like a cross-section line from the Leavenworth to the Entiat, which could shed some light on what those structures do at depth. But at the surface, they're inferred to be very vertical, near vertical faults, which also is in support of the strike slip motion.
Yeah. Well, we can go a bunch of different directions here. I mean, I texted you this morning with kind of a loose idea. I was going to demonstrate the whole, actually, can you just do it verbally? Or if you wanted to share something with your screen, that's fine. But that whole Tumwater Mountain thing with the piercing points were, well, I'll let you explain, but it's not a simple granite that's offset to get the amount of offset on the Leavenworth fault. Do you want to give that a try, either verbally or with an image or both?
Sure, let me see if I can pull up a map.
Good.
And share my screen. Okay, let me try sharing this.
You're not in your sister's store today, I can tell.
No, I'm in her office today.
You're so generous with your time to come back again today, so thank you so much for this.
Okay, I understand. All right, so I think the screen is shared.
Okay, let me get that. And I also see my battery's running low on my laptop, so I'm going to disconnect the iPad once we get you connected here. Just there. Good. Okay.
Yeah, so as far as the Tumwater Mountain member, this is a map of the Chumstick Basin. Okay. And for the piercing points, for the Mount Stewart batholith, and then our piercing point for the sedimentary units, yeah, it's not this classic, oh, there's a piece of the Mount Stewart batholith here on the left side of this fault and then another one on the right that you could bring back together. But what we have, because these are all sedimentary units, is that these dark brown colors along the Leavenworth fault zone here, they are breccias and conglomerates, and they're very coarse grained conglomerates, so like boulder plus size clasts, and these were deposited on very steep alluvial fan systems. And sedimentology tells us that when you have these steep alluvial fans, think of places like Death Valley where you have these big fans coming down from steep mountain ranges. Those clasts or the sand or any of the sediments haven't been transported very far from the source. So we know that in order for those to have been deposited, and all the clasts that are made up, here's the Mission Ridge ski hill here. Mm-hmm. They're made up of these tonalites and granodiorites that match the composition of the Mount Stewart batholith. And then we dated some of the clasts within that conglomerate, and they all match ages of this southern portion of the Mount Stewart batholith. So in order for these conglomerates to be deposited, then we would want to restore the Mount Stewart batholith all the way back to where it could be right across from where these conglomerates are.
Very cool.
And then because we know that those clasts couldn't have been transported far, so they were eroding down these pieces of the Mount Stewart batholith into the basin along these very steep gradient alluvial fans.
And that concept is so cool. And how do you know the different ages of those fans then? It's just a bunch of boulders sitting there, right?
Right. So it's similar. You can't really get an age of those fans unless, in this case, we have some of these tuffs that are
There we go.
coming down along the southern part of the Chumstick Basin. So here's that Clark Canyon 4 tuff. When we talked about it yesterday, this
Yeah.
was Matt's East Mission Ridge tuff. And so we dated this and we have an age for this tuff. And based on mapping from Tabor, it is folded along this little syncline in here, and then it strikes right into or beneath the Tumwater Mountain conglomerate. So we can get an estimated age of what some of these conglomerate units are. But the clast are primarily the Mount Stewart batholith, so that's not really going to give us a good age estimate as far as the maximum depositional age of those sediments, because they're just going to match the age of the Mount Stewart batholith, which is much older than the Chumstick Basin sediments.
Let me bring you back for just a sec.
Sure.
So so there we go. McClincy's tuffs and your tuffs are helping us again, not only come up with measuring sedimentation rates, which we haven't even talked about yet, but the fact that you've got offset along that strike slip fault bounding the basin. Before I forget about it then, can you help us, and this, I stumbled with this last spring and you had to help me in the live chat when I was teaching those 351 students. Can you help us visualize how extremely fast this sedimentation rate is, now that you know how to keep track of time with those tuffs? You can give us the sedimentation rates and then maybe help us visualize why that's just off the charts.
Yeah, sure.
You want to do that with images? Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, we can go back. So this is just a generalized strat column, and I can zoom.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
That's better? Okay. So this is the Clark Canyon member here. It's the lowermost member of the Chumstick Formation. And then our interpretation that we have is that this Tumwater Mountain member, again, the Tumwater Mountain member is just a conglomerate unit that parallels, it's in this thin, narrow zone that parallels the Leavenworth Fault Zone, those dark units.
Yeah.
We argue that that is age equivalent to this Clark Canyon member. And so you have these really steep alluvial fan sediments that are interfingering with the finer grained Clark Canyon member unit. And within the Clark Canyon unit, we know that we have all these interbedded tuffs down from our past conversations.
Right.
And so with that age, those precise ages, we can start to block off these different sections of the Clark Canyon member between the interbedded tuffs. And so you can measure the total thickness that's exposed between those interbedded tuffs. And now we can get a time that it was deposited between using these tuffs as our boundaries, and we can calculate sediment accumulation rates. And then you can get an understanding of how many millimeters of sediment were deposited per year. And so you can see some of those listed here. You can see some of these lowermost parts are 6 to 7 millimeters per year, which is extremely high. There is variation of those sedimentation rates, not only just in the actual same age strata, but in different facies or depositional environments within the same unit. So we have higher rates for the same section of strata in the southernmost part of the basin versus areas, the same age sediments in the northern part of the basin. So these are very variable, not only temporally across the Clark Canyon member, but also spatially. And to give you an idea, on average, sediment accumulation rates for strike slip basins tends to be between 2 to 3 millimeters per year. So you can see that these are almost double of that. And so we're still, thinking about what could this mean, because maybe it's before we had this precise age data, and there isn't a lot of other strike slip basin examples that have the same chronostratigraphy.
Yeah.
You might have a couple ages from the top or the bottom, and you would just take this entire stratigraphic section and you'd use, maybe 2 dates to calculate a sediment accumulation rate. So maybe because we have this more precise chronostratigraphy, it's helping us really understand how sedimentation rates change in strike slip basins. So we're still kind of working out on what some of these sediment accumulation rates mean for strike slip basins as a whole, because we've never had this precise chronostratigraphy for a strike slip basin before.
I mean, that's the big point to me, that at first glance you go, wow, this is like a one-of-a-kind basin. Amazing. Nobody's ever seen these kinds of rates before, but nobody's ever gotten these kinds of dates before, I guess, right? So
Yeah.
it could be there's other basins that have comparable sedimentation rates, but there's no way to keep track of time as well as you guys are here. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So it's hard to find a basin that has all these things, a well-exposed stratigraphic section, and you would need also a basin that has, some volcanic interbeds in there so that you could get this age data throughout the entire section. Because regardless of how you're calculating your sediment accumulation rates, there's a lot of assumptions you have to make.
Right.
And you're assuming that there is constant sedimentation or that there are no hiatuses. So there's a lot of assumptions that go into these sediment accumulation rates. So the finer, the more detailed chronostratigraphy you can have, there's a little less error with those assumptions that you're going to have to make for, say, like the entire 8 kilometers of section versus, now we have stuff constrained between 1 to 2 kilometers of section.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm remembering some of the questions from yesterday that I kind of said, well, we'll deal with it tomorrow. Well, it's tomorrow now. So just off the top of your head, can you think, so it is kind of a unique basin, just like you described, but are there other strike slip basins that come to mind in the world that have at least this basic pull-apart kind of strike slip action?
Yeah, so I was working on another paper with Paul, more for generalized strike slip basins, and you can see I put together an entire database of all these strike slip basins across the world, ancient examples, active examples, the type of crust, the tectonic setting, where they're located in the world. So you can see that there are a lot of different strike slip basins across the world in different tectonic settings. And so what I'm working on now then is to figure out how to plot up all this data and compare it and look at it. And find other examples of maybe where we can test some of these ideas of how strike slip basins initiate, what are the factors that go into that, as well as what causes their death. What's this relationship between their length and their width? When do the basin boundary faults kind of link? What's driving fault propagation? So all of these different questions that have been longstanding, I think, just with strike slip basins in general.
Well, I don't think anybody's working harder than you are, first of all. That's pretty amazing. I don't think we'll go back to your list, but are there a few basins that we would recognize? Or are they all super obscure things in Afghanistan or something?
No, I think I think it depends on where you're looking. So you get strike slip faults and then basins that form in a variety of tectonic settings. So where you have continental collision, where you could have oceanic plateau collision. So we think about the Caribbean, you have a lot of strike slip faulting and basins forming in Colombia and Ecuador, where you've had terrain accretion. In New Zealand, you've also had oceanic plateau accretion and collision, and there's a bunch of strike slip faults ripping through New Zealand, southern China. I mean, they're all over the world. They're almost present in every type of tectonic setting.
Well, it's a new thought for me right now, I guess, thinking about strike slip faults around the world that don't have basins, that are just like pure strike slip. And then you're talking more about strike slip faults that also create this space. So do you need is it apples and oranges as far as pure strike slip versus these strike slip pull apart basins as far as the tectonic situation? You need a certain oblique interaction between two plates, let's say. Is that the common denominator for these pull apart basins?
For pull-apart basins, you generally need to have two basin boundary strike slip faults that then are gonna, as they're moving, they create this zone of extension between them that like rips apart the crust, and that's your hole. That's where you can put your basin sediments. So for a classic pull apart, and the classification schemes for strike slip basins, also there's a ton of terminology out there, and it's tough to dig through. But you would want two parallel faults, and then they'd have the same, either right lateral, left lateral. So they need to be offset, and they would need to be moving in the same way that could then create extension between them. So you can call those either like fault bends if they're connected, the same faults are connected, or if they're just offset and echelon strike slip faults. And based on how they're offset and the motion of that strike slip fault, you could either get a transpressional pop up, so like that wouldn't necessarily be forming a basin between the faults, you'd be forming a little mountain range. You could still get sediments deposited in transpressional settings, but it's not going to be as much as if you're ripping apart the crust and creating a huge hole, which would be a transtensional setting.
Well, you got me going now. Okay, I got a couple other thoughts. And viewers, thank you for being with us. We'll get to your questions momentarily, I promise. You've heard that before, though. I keep hogging the time. Sorry. I've always, as you know, I didn't know anything about the Chumstick Basin essentially until I met you and Mike. Truly, like a year and a half ago, and we're up there in the Leavenworth Fault, and you guys are talking about these Mount Stewart stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I've never even thought about that. I think Mike said, where have you been? You live right over there. What do you mean? So this is all new to me just in general, but since I've been thinking about the Chumstick, I keep imagining the floor dropping out, but is it as helpful or maybe even more helpful to think about uplift on both sides of the Chumstick Basin? Like the exhumation is part of this, isn't it?
Yeah, I think strike slip settings are also complex. So there's usually on a strike slip fault, you might see motions of extension. You could see reverse faulting, normal faulting. It's usually a complex array of faults, and they all have a different history and role during that formation of a strike slip basin. And we know that during deposition of the Chumstick Basin that the Chelan block, so the block that's east of the NTAT fault zone, was being uplifted. And so that also is going to play a role in how much sediment was coming into that hole then, if we're actively exhuming the area east of the Chumstick Basin. And we know that's where a majority of our sediments are coming from based off of the composition of the sandstones, the conglomerate clast, as well as doing some detrital zircon geochronology work. We know the majority of the sediments were coming from the east, and that the sediments that were coming from the west were really only the sediments that we see on those steep alluvial fans that were bordering the Leavenworth fault zone.
The Leavenworth, yeah. But on the other side of the basin, you were doing all those cobble counts or whatever in your pie charts to talk about different kinds of basically fruitcake stuff spilling over the Eniot fault. Is that right?
Yeah, so within the Chumstick Basin, there are a lot of conglomerates that are interbedded with the sandstones. And you can think of it, if I share, I can show the depositional models.
Is it truly just stuff like this, basically? Are you talking about this size clasts for you're doing your do you call it a pebble count, or what's your process when you're trying to work with something on the margin of the Chumstick Basin?
Yeah, so we call them conglomerate class counts, and you can do them in any size conglomerate. So you can do them in pebble conglomerates, cobble conglomerates, boulder conglomerates. Obviously, the larger size the class, the easier it's going to tell what composition it is. So that's always very helpful when you have larger clasts. But yeah, so our interpretation for the depositional model for the Chumstick Basin then would be that you have the majority of the sediments being derived from the east here. So that's the NTAT fault zone. This is the Leavenworth fault zone. And these yellow and orange colors would be this very low gradient, braided stream dominated fan. And so it's a big braided stream system, and it's deriving a majority of the sediments for the east. And then the system would kind of prograde out towards the west, and then we would think that the zone of maximum subsidence or accommodation space would be close to the Leavenworth fault zone, because this was you could think of it as the master strike slip fault zone during deposition of the Chumstick Basin. And so you'd have the most subsidence along that axis. And this big east-derived system would then interfinger with these west-derived steep alluvial fans. You can see the little strip of yellow there along this basin axis, more of a meandering stream system that would then likely flow to the south somewhere and out of the basin.
So you view both basin bounding faults active at the same time? Is one active more than the other, or you view them kind of working in concert with each other?
Yeah, so it's really hard to get an estimate of how much strike slip motion along the Entiat occurred during deposition of the Chumstick, because we don't have a clean piercing point on this eastern part of the Entiat fault zone. If we look at the source terrain map, you can see that the Swakane Gneiss and then the Napiqua complex parallels the Entiat fault zone for the majority of the length of the Chumstick Basin. And so we don't have a clean piercing point for where those conglomerate cobbles were coming from the east. So it's hard to say how much motion along the Entiat fault zone was happening while you were depositing the Chumstick. And then there's also just a ton of different models for strike slip basin formation that some would argue that, when your master fault is propagating, that the Entiat fault zone wouldn't be moving that much if this Leavenworth fault zone was propagating to the north. So there's a whole bunch of different models for strike slip basin formation that I'm still exploring. That's kind of the focus for the next paper that would explore the Chumstick more as a strike slip basin that we were working on, similar to the talk that I gave at GSA.
Why is that Chumstick out there by itself? Like that, you got nothing but exotic terrains, and then you got that one huge sandbox. There aren't any others, are there?
So we don't know we know that there are some basins that are beneath the Quaternary and the Columbia River basalts down to the south. Yeah. But as far as why there isn't any more to the north, we can see that, my best guess is that the Leavenworth fault zone, it wasn't always linked like this. You can see that it bends over to meet the Entiat fault zone. Yeah, I would argue that we initially had the Leavenworth fault zone and it propagated northward. As it propagated northward, that's when we see this shingling of basin strata in the Chumstick Basin. And that at some point it linked over to the Entiat fault zone. So it bent to meet the Entiat fault zone. And then shortly after, the Chumstick Basin was no more. It died. It fizzled out after it linked to the Entiat fault zone.
I see.
And yeah, so
there's probably a longer, more recent history with offset on the Entiat than the Leavenworth?
Yeah, so
maybe
that's not sure when the Entiat then links to, or the timing of all the linkages of the different strike slip faults in this region, but we could infer that maybe the Leavenworth, as soon as it linked to the Entiat, then it kind of died and it fizzled out.
Now, this isn't your area of expertise, I don't think, but I'm reminded that Cloudy Pass Pluton, I don't know if you can enlarge to that orange or point to it. Do you remember?
Right here.
Yeah, that thing there, do we know it? So obviously that hasn't been offset. So do we have a good date on the Cloudy Pass to know when we kill the Entiat for sure?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. That would be a good question for Bob or Mike.
Yeah. I think on one map I saw Miocene, but that didn't make any sense to me. So I wonder if that's going to be part of the targets. I don't know. I was thinking we'd do the whole thing going back to the Olympics, but maybe that's too much for today. I don't know, how do you, is there anything else you wanted to show? This is a paper that just came out, right? This is your paper from 2021?
Right, yes.
And that's a culmination, so the viewers at home, you have this paper at the website, if you haven't seen it already. So this, Erin, is kind of a culmination of your mostly your master's work with Paul that you've kind of
yes.
spruced up. And,
yes.
And then is there another paper in the works that will somehow combine this with your more recent work on the Olympics?
So we don't have a paper that would combine to the Olympics yet. The second paper that we were working on would be more of exploring the Chumstick Basin as a strike-slip basin, and specifically looking at trying to understand fault propagation rates of the Leavenworth Fault Zone and how that ties to the different depicenters, the migrating depicenters that we mapped in the Chumstick Basin, and then kind of trying to better understand how this relates in a more broader sense to strike-slip basin formation and death as a whole. So why do we see this really rapid sediment accumulation rate towards where the Chumstick Basin initiated? Is that just an artifact of where we measured the sections, and why does it change in different depositional environments? So and the same age sediments across the basin. So it's the next paper for the Chumstick, and would really focus on just exploring what the Chumstick can tell us about strike-slip basins as a whole, in a broader kind of sense.
Well, and that regional story is tempting for me, but I don't know, maybe you're not there as far as following the Chumstick sand back over to Western Washington. That's kind of in the works. I mean, basically, people were asking yesterday, where is the sand coming from and where is it going? Is it all just going to the Chumstick and just that's the grave for that sand, or is there an outlet as well?
Yeah, so we're not sure. We looked at, there's been some work on the Tyee Basin in Oregon, and this inference of an Idaho River and sediments, this big Idaho River that would dump sediments in the Tyee Basin. And if there's this big regional system there, and if we had a south flowing river in the Chumstick, we kind of just toyed around with the idea, would the Chumstick River go and join up with this Idaho River, or would it turn west and head towards the coast? So we just did some general comparisons of the detrital zircon geochronology in the Tyee Basin, as well as to the Blue Mountain unit, because we think that's the oldest sediments that are being deposited on the Olympic Peninsula. And yeah, the Blue Mountain might be more age equivalent to the uppermost part of the Chumstick or the Dead Horse or the Roslyn, with some of those maximum depositional ages being around 44.7 starts to make it look a little younger, but we're not sure entirely. But if it did, turn west and head towards the Olympic Peninsula and was helping feed some of these turbidites, there are some overlaps in the detrital zircon spectra, but I think you still have to be a little careful about that, because there's plenty of different places those sediments could have been sourced from.
You are good. We're going to go to some live questions here. Thank you, viewers, for being patient. And then I think my laptop's almost totally charged again. Is it? Shit. Sorry, Patrick. Maybe it's not. I was going to go, after we say goodbye to Erin, I was just going to go back to the iPad and do a couple things I had planned, but I don't know if I'm going to be charged up enough for that. So without further ado, Erin, you got 5 more minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Plenty of time.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to scroll back, look for some uppercase, and Bones B asks, how wide and long is the Chumstick Formation? We know 8 kilometers deep. You're handicapped by the Columbia River basalts, but just with the exposure, can you give us the dimensions one more time of the basin and the depth?
Yeah. So what we can see it's about 75 kilometers long and then 25 to 30 kilometers wide. That's just based off of the map, like the simplified map that I showed when I shared my screen. But yes, we don't know if it continues down to the south, and we would imagine that it does project to the south beneath Columbia's. The Clark Canyon member is 8.5 to 9 kilometers thick, but the actual basin depth is only about 2 to 3. So it was not an 8 kilometer deep hole. It was about 2 to 3 kilometer deep hole. And how you fit in 8.5 to 9 kilometers of sediment is that you have to start shingling them. And that's the only way you can fit that amount of strata into that shallow hole.
I mean, speaking of
that
all
make
this,
sense?
it does. There's a little bit of emailing among geologists behind the scenes related to this series, and I saw Bob Miller sent an email to a bunch of us, including you, and he's like, "No offense, Erin, but that Chumstick's in the way. Like, we want to be able to know the relationship between some of these exotic terrains and some of the others." So it is, if you're so focused on the Cretaceous, let's say, or something like that, it's kind of inconvenient to have this incredible hole with all this sawdust sitting on top of these important relationships, and
Yeah.
but if you're willing to go into that basin, you're learning more about the exhumation and other things. R. Wilson, if Chumstick is a basin or was a basin, why didn't it fill up with water?
So it's a non-marine basin, and so you can have marine sedimentary basins and you can have non-marine sedimentary basins. And so marine basins, or if it did fill up with water, it would be a lacustrine, like a lake setting. And we actually do think that maybe early in the basin history that there was a lacustrine setting. So there's a big lake in that maximum zone of subsidence. But you have such an influx of sediments that you filled it up with water. But if this basin was forming, close to a marine setting, then it would probably be a marine basin.
Thank you. We'll keep going. You're breaking up a little bit. I don't know. Your sister Allison might be playing video games or something right now, but we'll keep going.
Have big river.
Patrick, age 8. Can you still hear me, Erin? Are we okay? Oh, we're breaking up significantly now.
Choppy. I think like the internet got choppy.
Okay, well, we'll try a couple more. I hope we're still together here. I'll ask a question, hope that you can hear it. Patrick, age 8. Erin, how was your work with the Chumstick Basin? How has your work with the Chumstick Basin changed your ideas about the Olympic Peninsula and up into Alaska? So you did the Chumstick Basin work first before you went to the Olympics, but what benefits, Erin, do you see by knowing the Chumstick details with similar units on the Olympic Peninsula? Oh, we may have lost her. For a change, it's not me. Feels great, baby. Feels great.
You
Can just kind of hear you now, but your picture's frozen, Erin.
Okay. Is the
I can see you're moving again. We'll give it a chance to catch
Okay.
up. I think we might be there.
okay?
Did you hear?
I
Patrick?
changed. Yeah, I changed the internet that I'm
Okay.
on. I did hear Patrick's question.
Good. Do you
So
have-
I think it's working now a little better.
Yes,
So,
it is.
but yeah, that's a really good. Okay, that's a really good question. I think going into the Chumstick Basin, it formed in like this four-arc setting. So you'd want it to be like initially going in, you'd want it to be some four-arc basin, and then quickly learning when you're out there and like mapping it, like, oh no, like this is a different style of basin. And so I think like heading into the Olympic Peninsula, I was also, those peripheral rock strata on the Olympic Peninsula are also interpreted to be forearc basin strata. And so what I've really been challenging myself is to, they were interpreted as forearc basin strata prior to this Silesia collision model. So really trying to test, is this still a forearc basin setting, or what is the type of basin that we get that would be first forming following terrain accretion, collision and accretion. So I think the basins, the Chumstick and the Olympic Peninsula, don't necessarily relate to each other at all, but I think this broader idea of kind of rethinking, okay, this is supposed to be in this setting, but is this actually what we're seeing? And
Right.
just trying to look at the data really objectively and try to fit it into this Silesia collision model as well. Because I think it's a really interesting question that, you know, if this is a forearc basin setting, is this what initial forearc basin sedimentation looks like after terrain collision? Or is it just a different type of basin setting that we're looking at?
Well, the skills you have are just, you've got the full arsenal of skills, including you had a stint with the oil industry, didn't you, between master's and PhD? How did that work help you at all with what you're doing now?
Yeah, I got to work some really cool projects in the oil and gas industry. I was lucky enough to stay in conventional exploration. So I got to I got to drill a deep water well in the Gulf of Mexico, which was really exciting. So I got to see all these different types of basins that form in different tectonic settings around the world. Because after the exploration team in the Gulf of Mexico, I moved kind of to the frontier play conventional exploration team, which was, you know, doing similar basin analysis work that I do now and that I did before I worked in the oil and gas industry. So taking all these different little pieces of data and trying to put together a basin story. And so it's kind of just putting together a puzzle. Let's see what data we can get.
Right.
And I got to study all these amazing basins around the world and trying to understand their history, how it relates to tectonics. And of course, there's a little more of a oil and gas tie there because we want to know, you know, like how thick's the reservoirs,
Right.
where's the source, is my trap in place, is the timing all right? So,
Yeah.
but it's still all the same basin analysis work. You just put in the oil and gas kind of play elements, which are, you know, source, trap, seal, and your timing. So.
Wow, really cool. How about three more?
Sure.
Richard Murdoch. Regarding rapid deposition rates, doesn't the exceptionally warm/wet Eocene help explain that, as witnessed in the nearby tremendously thick Powder River Basin coal deposits? And boiler up, Erin, Purdue reference. So has that been thought of at all, the climate being different?
Yeah, climate has a huge role in the sedimentation rates. And so we know that it was a humid climate while the Chumstick Formation was being deposited. I'm sure when you've been out there looking at the rocks, you can pick up almost any sandstone and you'll see all these fossils, these like fragments of leaf fossils. And so we know it was a very vegetated, low gradient fan system. And that's because of that low gradient, you could have all those different plants and organic kind of material getting worked into that depositional system. But it does play a huge role into the sedimentation rates because your climate is going to drive how much rain there is, how much erosion there is, like how far sediment's going to be transported. So these are all the types of things that go into when you're trying to understand sediment accumulation rates and subsidence and climate. They all kind of are part of that understanding, but it's hard to figure out what's driving what. That's the big challenge.
Yeah.
So is it my subsidence? Is it how much sediment I'm filling in the hole? And is it the climate driving the weather and the rain? It's really hard to split all of those different things out.
Oh, I'm just loving this. I don't want to stop. I'm just trying to grab a couple more before, I don't know, you're not seeing these now, maybe? It's totally different.
I had them pulled up.
I'm scrolling way back. I'm trying to stay away from the volcanism. I'm just kind of commenting now on things I see. I'm trying to stay away from certain fireworks that we haven't gotten into yet. Although I think I'm fascinated, and I think a lot of people are fascinated by this rapid uplift just to the north of that Chumstick Basin. So I do feel like I want to, I don't know, maybe that's where we go next after the new year, because there's this. Actually,
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah. So that's how we'll finish with you, Erin. Both your poster from GSA in Portland, which I'm not sharing because you've got some data that you don't want to, is not ready to be public yet, and your paper that they can all see, you've got these beautiful pie charts, and it's from those Cabo conglomerate counts. So were you truly finding, can you give us a kind of a rundown of, if you remember, specific exotic terrain sources that you're finding in the Chumstick? Like, it's not just a bunch of fine sand, but there's big cobbles of this and this and this just to the north. What are some names we would recognize of some exotic terrain?
Yeah.
You want to share
Yeah,
with
that
them?
was the conglomerate. Yeah, we can share. That's fine. The conglomerate class counts in the Chumstick Basin were amazing, and I actually worked with Bob Miller for like 2 or 3 days at the beginning of my field season so that he could help me identify all of these different source terrains that are adjacent to the Chumstick Basin. So all of these different metamorphic and igneous terrains, well, I needed to know how to identify those in a class. So I need to know what they looked like, and
Right.
so I could describe them in my notes and be able to figure out where the sediments were coming from. And so for some of the source terrains, you would recognize a majority of the sediments are coming from the Swakane gneiss, so the
Okay.
biotite gneiss. You also see sediments from the Napiqua, which is important because the Napiqua doesn't have a lot of detrital zircon in there. They're very rare. So that signature wouldn't come up in a detrital zircon geochronology study, but we can see all the class, these amphibolites and quartzites and things that match the composition of the Napiqua. And then we also see class coming from the Enya. You see them coming from all of these different plutons, including some of these Eocene plutons, which meant that, yes, these plutons, not only were they shallowly intruded, they were rapidly uplifted. In order to be kind of intruded at the same time, we have Chumstick sediments being deposited, but then for those sediments to be incorporated into the youngest part of the Clark Canyon member, and then this Nehaim member in the eastern subbasin.
Wow.
So we see sediments being sourced from all of these different terrains, mostly in the east, and then along the west on the Leavenworth Fault Zone, we see, of course, the class from the Mount Stewart, but you also, when you move into some of these upper the Tumwater Mountain member in the northern part of the Chumstick Formation, we see Mount Stewart class, we see the schist class, all the Nason Ridge, this Wenatchee Ridge gneiss. So you see you can track through the different age strata how sediment routing systems were changing, essentially. And the last figure in this paper kind of tries to explore that a little more. That you can see these maps here, these little white dotted lines kind of highlight the areas where the majority of the sediment were coming from, and these different time slices for the Clark Canyon member. So you can see as time progresses, you're eroding more and more sediments from further back in the Chelan block from the east, and that you're incorporating more of these sediments along from these different source terrains along the west. So this last figure kind of explores that, and it's a combination of, the compositional data that we have, the sandstone petrography, conglomerate class counts, as well as the detrital zircon geochronology, kind of helped us put together these sediment routing maps.
Well, I think I want to hit something hard right now, and I guess it's remembering talking to Mike a few days ago. He was talking about the crazy exhumation and not having an obvious detachment fault that's going to accommodate that kind of crazy uplift and then extension, but I just kind of impulsively said, but if you do all that uplifting, you erode all that material, and where did it go? Is part of the answer the chumstick? Like, is it that
Yeah,
simple? Like,
I think, well, we definitely know that sediments are coming from that eastern Chilean block are being dumped right into the Chumstick Basin. So
and
that is, but where it goes from the Chumstick is a little more unknown.
well, I should have had that thought earlier, I guess, kind of a one-to-one correlation, but I'm embarrassed to say I didn't have it till right now. That last diagram and your words helped me. So thank you. That's plenty. It's already almost 20 minutes after the top of the hour. I want to thank you again for not only your help today, but yesterday, the previous show, and then you're often in the chat helping these guys and answering questions. So you get a gold star for all of your efforts.
Thank you.
So thank you, Erin. I hope to visit with
Yes.
you again sometime. I'm sure this is
Yes.
not the end of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for
Okay.
having me.
You bet. Have a good day today.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. That was Erin Donaghy from Purdue University. Grateful to her for her time. Okay. We're running long, but I'm not going to see you for a while, so let's finish strong. What the hell? Are we still communicating, first of all? And then let me go to the iPad. I'm up to a 65% charge on my laptop battery, so I feel like I want to just follow through with a little bit more related to Erin. I'll just add a couple more things. Thank you, 5x5. Thank you, Patrick and others. So what? Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to unplug the laptop. I'm going to unplug the power from the laptop. I'm going to reconnect the iPad, try to go there, try not to have a frozen camera, and we'll finish our session with a few things that I thought I would look at early in the show, but I wanted to get to Erin earlier than later. Talk amongst yourselves. Power is out. Is this going to work? iPad is plugged in. It wikes. All right, up to 30 degrees. Boy, that's balmy. What did I want to show you? Oh yeah, here. Come on, boy. Uh-oh, what's going on? Thank you. Basically, I wanted to show you a couple things that are new to me. So we finished, remember Matt McClincy yesterday. I think we're still functional here. That was the last image from the McClincy thesis, and we're back to talking about the North Cascades and the exotic terrains and the plutons to the north that are Eocene in age. So that's a little sneak peek for after the first of the year. But instead of going to a live YouTube link, this is my latest attempt. So this is a video that I shot when I first met Mike and Erin. Like, it was my first time meeting Erin. This is probably like, I don't know, July of 2020. In the heart of the lockdown, this is Mike Eddy and Erin Donaghy, and I met them. They were driving home. They drove all the way out from Indiana to the Olympic Peninsula, just Mike and Erin. They spent, I don't know what it was, 10 days camping and hiking, and then I met them on the way back. I didn't even know Erin was going to be with Mike at the time, but of course I like shake their hands and say, nice to meet you, can I start filming you? And they're like, what? So the reason I'm sharing this with you, if you can see behind Mike, do you see these? These are big blocks of the Tumwater Mountain member. So they're big blocks of Stewart that got shed down that drainage. Here's another, come on, here's another one. There's no sound here on purpose so that we can talk, but you know, I met Erin 10 minutes earlier, and now she's talking about Chumstick, and she's talking about all these details. I'm like, who is this gal? I mean, really impressed. I didn't even have a microphone for her. I had my little lapel that I was just holding in front of her face. And she just kind of did what she just did with us today. She just has all this ready to go. And Mike just kind of took a back seat for a while, and she just got me going, got me introduced to not only the Leavenworth Fault. So we're up at Mission Ridge Ski Area, which is this place where the Leavenworth Fault is coming right through the hills. And it was the same idea. I was literally with them for a total of 25 minutes before they jumped back in the car and started heading across the country. And shaky camera here, but again, this idea that these are individual cobbles that came away from Mount Stewart and then got cemented together in this Tumwater Mountain conglomerate deposited in the Chumstick Basin, but we're basically right on the fault zone itself. Okay, I don't think that's as stuttery as the YouTube live link, so if I do more YouTube clips, I'll do it that way, I think. Just doing a screen grab or capture or whatever that's called. So this is just putting a little bow on our time with Erin. This is her master's thesis before she started working with Mike Eddy. And these are some of, again, her master's thesis, which is frickin' 200 pages, or I don't know, what an overachiever she is. Master's thesis, for goodness sake. Taking prior paleocurrent work, and she's kind of a synthesizer like Mike is, and Paul was. Yeah, okay. She's got beautiful strat columns. Can I do this full screen? She's got beautiful strat columns. This is at that Leavenworth ski hill area. So everything she does is solid gold as far as I'm concerned, obviously. And this is, sorry, let's go back, escape. So this is a little bit more careful look in her thesis of going from bottom to top of the Clark Canyon member within the Chumstick Formation. So the red is McClincy's tuffs with the precise ages from Mike and her, plant fossils here and there. And then, which we really didn't talk about in this show, there's some other members. The Nahatam, thank you Randy Lewis to know how to pronounce it. The dead horse. If you're from Roslyn, Washington, you're curious how that factors in. It's a little unclear still, I think. And then I'll finish with this also, I think is from, I'm confused now if this is Erin's thesis or if it's her new paper that's waiting for you. But graphically, she's trying to help us see these, this wrenching business. Leavenworth Fault on one side, Antioch Fault on the other. Not only do we have the strike slip motion, but we have this opening and having all this sediment dump inside. Is that it? Is that it, boy? Oh, no. So here's a little bit bigger versions of what Erin was showing us with her paper. I'll just do this quickly because it's all waiting for you at the website. But those are those raging streams. I'm very captivated by how energetic, how long, how, what did those rivers look like? And were they just chock full of sediment coming from the north part of the fruitcake, the part of the fruitcake that's exposed to the north? And then there's those conglomerates on the south side. Yeah, the Wenatchee intrusions and the gold and all that is part of this as well, but we've got fish that we can fry later on. Here is the paper that Erin just put out. Again, those pie charts are that's her work with all these little baked potatoes, basically, and trying to decide which is schist and which is quartzite and which is this and which is that, and then determining source. And she has done that both on the Olympic Peninsula now with the Blue Mountain unit and those peripheral units, as well as the Chumstick itself. Okay, you get the idea. Erin Donaghy, we salute you. Frozen? Tried to be frozen, but not quite. Okay. We'll do a couple more questions, just you and I, and then we'll sign off. Gary, doesn't it seem like the rise of the mountains is part of the Cascade Story rise? I think I know what you mean, Gary. The massive uplift in the Eocene, the crystalline core, in other words, is going to be definitely at least 2 shows, maybe more. I'm very interested in them. And yes, the timing of that works with this story here. And Papagino wants to know about the exhibition, so we'll leave that alone for now. Thanks. Is Salton Sea transtension? I think so. Yes. Similar? I think so. I tried a couple times, and Erin didn't want to go through some specific names, probably just because she had so many compiled. But I am curious about visualizing a modern analog or 2 where a bunch of the sediment is coming in and you've got strike-slip faults on both sides. Maybe it's not known where that is. I don't know. Rachel, I was intrigued by her larger Chumstick River idea, but I think she's backing away from that a little bit if I can read her properly, or it's a little premature to talk about it. So I've backed off as well. You know, oftentimes when you email or you visit in real time in front of everybody, sometimes I can pick up on the fact that they're like, yeah, move on. I don't want to talk about that. And there's different reasons for that. Sometimes you're not certain. Sometimes you've got good stuff, but it's not the time to bring it up and share it with everybody. This is a competitive scientific world, not for me, but others who do research, so they don't want, you know, there's a process in publishing that needs to be represented. Gary, is the Republic graben part of Soletzia fireworks? Yes, for sure, the Republic graben. And that's, as we get further east and start chasing core complexes and chalice magmas, as we will do in January, the Republic graben will be visited for sure. I know almost nothing, but I know that's going to be in our sites. Hawkeye says maybe a modern example is the Montanuska Valley. Sure, sounds good. I believe you. Thank you. Cosmic J, Soletzia accretional crunch gives us many consequential processes to observe. Yes, that's the whole point. So I think that's how we'll finish before we sign off. This is the framework for the rest of the alphabet. And you're sick of me now saying this is all a result of the accretion of Soletzia. But what is new, and we're just starting to think about it, you and I, is that the accretion of Soletzia is a compressional story. But shortly after that compression, things start opening up. Things start relaxing. Things start getting wrenched, like we were talking about today. And we have magmas coming up. We have sediments being dropped. We have all sorts of ups and downs. And it's not a tight compressional story any longer. And so we will find that that's kind of a common theme throughout much of what we do, even with the chalice magmas and depositing gold and blue agates and everything else. It's all this kind of change of a regime from transpressional, accreting Soletzia, to transtensional, developing strike-slip basins and other Eocene fireworks. A toast to you. Here's to Erin Donaghy for her 3rd appearance on this series. And if you recall, her first appearance was all sorts of trouble on my end, and yet she came back for 2 more. So here's to Erin Donaghy. Here's to Michael Eddy, who continues to be involved in Erin's work, and they are a truly impressive team, and it's been fun to get to know them here in this series the last few shows. Here's to Mike Eddy. Here's to all of you for joining us today, yesterday, last Wednesday, the previous weekend, etc., etc., etc. You are regularly part of this, and it's so fun to have so many of you with us. I have a very big deal guest coming in January. I never dreamt that I'd get a chance to have her with us. And she's mostly inspired to join us from halfway around the world because she's so impressed with the number of people who are engaging in this. She can't believe it. And so she wants to be part of it. So here's to you for being impressive. Here's to your health during this special holiday time and the health and well-being of your friends and your family and everyone in your community. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry that I broke Silesia/Yakutat, but oh well. And as a special treat, before we say goodbye to each other, I found something in the freezer down in the basement, and I was rooting around for something else last night. Was this in the freezer? Mappy McMap, was it in the freezer? No, it was not. But many of us were working hard together to learn what we could about the exotic terrains of the American West. And what's the analogy that we had a year ago for all of these different exotic terrains? I kept a piece. I kept a piece of the fruitcake created with love and devotion by Vinman's Bakery in downtown Ellensburg. You've got to love it. And so to you, I say, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy whatever to everyone around the world. Good luck, Happy New Year, and I'll see you in January of 2022.